when Bob and Ryan approached me a couple of weeks ago and asked me, told me what they wanted to do and asked me to do this part of it, they said something to me. They said, you and Susan have been here the longest continuously from the time we started. And that's a sobering thought. It's a happy thought, and it's an accurate thought. So I'm thinking of putting this all together in my mind and thinking, okay, I've got to say this, and I've got to say this, and I've got to show this, and I've got to show that. My wife says, quit overthinking it. Don't overthink it, and don't take all night saying it. And as usual, she was right on the money, and hopefully I can do this in about 10 minutes. So, in 1995, Susan and I and our 4 children were worshiping at the Kirkwood Church. And sometime late summer, early fall of 1995, Brother Allen, Roy Allen, one of the elders at Kirkwood, stood up and he read a letter to the congregation. This letter was from a gentleman named George Estes, and he was the preacher at the Ellisville Church of Christ. I had never heard of George Estes before. I had never heard of the Ellisville Church of Christ before. First time. So come to find out that George and Irma, in about 1960, started a work here in this area. And they were in various buildings for a time, and 20 years later, in 1980, they bought a building on this lot from a denominational group, 1980. So this is now 1995 when the letter is being read. And the letter basically said that despite his attempt over many years to get something started out here, it just wasn't working. And there were no more than 20 or 25 people ever here at the building. And it had come to the point where George, who was probably at that time, I would say in his 70s, was doing everything. I mean everything. Singing, teaching, preaching, Lord's Supper, praying. He was just about the only faithful man that was left. And so George had grown weary and tired, and he was going to close the doors and sell the building unless they could find some folks that wanted to come out here and give it a shot. So there were several of us at Kirkwood who lived out in this general direction, and we thought, well, why not? Let's try it and see what happens. So we decided to come here. And on the last Wednesday night, before we were to come here for our very first Sunday morning, there was a young couple at church that had been there just that one time. They showed up, they were visiting. The husband had been transferred back from his job in Brazil and relocated to St. Louis, and that was Bob Kyle. So Bob and Sandy, their 2 daughters, Brian and Stacy, were at church. We met them. We said, hey, and we found out they lived out here. And we said, hey, we're thinking about doing this. And they said, oh, really? They said, we're used to worshiping with a small group. We'll come. And so that very first Sunday that we came here, there were 15 of us. Susan and I and our 4 kids, Bob and Sandy and their 2 daughters, Vaughn and Tamara Williams and their son Todd, and Forrest and Leah Hall, 15 people. When we walked into that building, we probably increased the size from 15 to about 22 or 23. There weren't too many of them that were here. There are a lot of things that I could say about those early days. One of the toughest but necessary was stepping out of your comfort zone. When you walk into a place that there's only one gentleman, and he's been doing everything for a number of years, those of us who hadn't preached or taught a class or led singing, we needed to step up, and that happened from the very beginning. Whatever needed to be done, we did it. And so those first few months in 1995 when we were here, it was wonderful. I mean, it was scary at times, but it was really wonderful. And the group was close knit. We did a lot of things together, and that hardly ever changed. Towards the end of 1995, Bob told me that there's the preacher that he had met in Brazil that they had been worshiping with, Joe Works, was coming back to the United States. Joe and Beth were from Indiana, and they had been in Brazil for a couple of years, and they were going to come back to the States, but they were going to Indiana because they hadn't been home in 2 years, and that's where they're both from, and that's where they were headed. And Bob convinced Joe to come here and preach for us one Sunday. So Joe stopped by. He preached for us on Sunday morning. We invited him over to a potluck at Von and Tamara's house and talked to him about what was going on here, what we wanted to do. And Joe said, "No, thank you very much. Sounds promising, but I promised Beth that we're going home. We're going to Indiana." So Joe left, and I don't know how long it was after that, we got notified that Joe had changed his mind and that he was coming here. So I've been talking about this place, so let's take let me preface this. Thank you to whoever sent pictures for me for this slide. It's a daunting task trying to find 26-year-old pictures of anything, but there are people who I'm grateful for doing this. This was the old building that we came to. You'll notice it's pretty far back on the property, okay? But it was a simple one-room building. About, I don't know, I would say maybe a third of the size of this building. It wasn't very big. It was a small little place. Pictures of the inside. A lot of memories from there, but one of the ones that never goes away is at the back of this room, the back of the auditorium, there were bathrooms that were located inside the inside the building. They weren't outside. They were inside. And I can't tell you how many times we heard flushing. We heard conversations from children and parents. We heard all sorts of things from those bathrooms. It was it was interesting. So this building had a basement. That's where our classrooms were located. Believe me when I tell you that these pictures make that basement look great. That place was a dump. It was cold, it was dank, and we had to figure out how are we going to divide this? How are we going to put classrooms down here? And so what we did what we had to do, and and that's the basement. So Joe came back, and he told us from the very beginning when he started working with us here. He said, "I'm going to be here for 2 years, and I've made a commitment to go back to Brazil." And we said, "Okay, fine." The men decided that we liked Joe. He was a good guy. We all got along. We decided that, okay, go back to Brazil, but come back here in 2 years. And he said, okay. So we shopped around. We found a young guy, I don't know, 21 maybe, I don't know how old he was, Jesse Flowers, who came and worked here for the 2 years. We told him up front, Jesse, it's 2 years and then you're out. We've got other plans. And so Jesse came here for 2 years, and then Joe came back as promised. So that was the old building. I have some pictures here. Some you'll recognize of people. Some you're going to say, oh my goodness. But I'll go through these and just give you a little look-see. So you might see people in that picture you recognize. There's Jay with hair, actually. We all had more hair back then, didn't we, Jay? about that? Where's Katie? Katie, recognize anybody in that picture? Yeah. Ethan Suter. Those were pictures taken in the classroom in the basement. Some more pictures. The gentleman in the lower, my lower left, his name was Ed Riley. That's Patty Carrick's dad. He worshiped with us for some years as well. And there's the Ailey's. So, currently, as members of this group, there are folks that are still here that came at various times to Ellisville. Besides us and the Kyles, the Suters, the Gershensons, the Scarboroughs, Ben and Lisa and their kids, James, Ray, no, I won't say it, Ray with hair. I said most of us had more hair back then. Ray with hair, Rosie, and Emily. Emily was just a baby. She was, I don't know, just small. So by 2002, we had increased to about 60 or 70 folks. We'd outgrown that old building. It was bulging. We had issues there with people occupancy. And we had issues with parking. If you look out this side of the building, the original property line only extended from this building, I don't know, 30, 40 feet. I mean, maybe a little bit longer, but it wasn't much. We didn't have much property over here. And so we needed something else. And so the men decided that the best option was to build a new building on this existing property. So in July of 2002, the old building was torn down, and the very next day after this, the basement was poured for this current building. That was in July of 2002. For the next several months, this group met at Kirkwood. We met there on Sunday afternoon from 2 to 4, and we met there on Thursday night for Bible study. And that was different too. It's one thing to go somewhere else. It's one thing to wake up in the morning and not get ready for church because it doesn't start till 2 o'clock. So you're eating breakfast, you're mowing the grass, and it was just a different feeling. Our first meeting, our first worship service in this building took place on March 3rd, 2003. It was a very exciting day. I can hardly be in this building and not express or not think of how grateful and thankful we were and are to have Ed Gershenson. To have somebody spearheading all this, somebody with the expertise and the knowledge of architects and contractors and subcontractors and attorneys, putting all this together and making this happen, that was and is such a great blessing. So this new building, it, of course, increased our occupancy from 60 or 70 to 100 and, 162, what it is back there. But in the interim, building this building actually cost us some parking spaces. And so that even made parking more of a problem than it had been before. I can't tell you how interesting it is to walk from this building in a snowstorm or driving rain all the way up to the bank on the corner, because that's where they had graciously allowed us to park for years until we had more parking here. So it was it was a very interesting time. And I'm quite sure that it probably cost us members too, because I think people would probably drive by and see a parking lot completely full and think, well, there's no place to park and not stopping. And so that probably cost us as well. Elders were first appointed here, I think in 2004 or 2005. I can't remember exactly what the year was. At that time, we were probably probably north of 100 by a little bit. But the amazing thing to me, and I tell people this all the time, I told somebody that here this morning, we had probably, out of the 105, 110 people that were here, we probably had 60 or more children that were 16 and under. I mean, it was a lot. And we would get visitors, and they would come on Sunday morning. They'd walk in here, and there'd be like 10 people in Bible class. And, I don't know what they thought, but as soon as that bell rang and that herd came from downstairs, upstairs, it was amazing. And even today, somebody complimented it today. You have no idea, unless you've been at a place that doesn't have young people. You have no idea what a blessing that is, to have them. To have them, to mold them, to teach them, to help them prepare to be the next generation. A great, great blessing. So, let's fast forward to 2007. In 2007, towards the end of the year, Doug Boyer and Emery Koch, they were members of the Afton congregation, and they met with the elders here to talk about some things. Afton Church had, it was the first place Susan and I worshiped when we were married, and that's where we first met the Kochs and the Boyers as well, way back then, 1980, a long time ago. Doug and Emery said that they had sold their building probably about 2 years before that. And they had dwindled to a small group. They couldn't afford it, had some elderly members, and so they sold their building, and they were worshiping in, I think, an office complex somewhere. And they decided that they were not going to rebuild. There was no point in trying to start another work somewhere else when there were already several places that were established. And they had a dilemma. They had all this money from the sale of their building. And they tried to find the best way to do this. And the best way for this to happen and everything to work like it was supposed to was they had to be a merge. So the Afton Church had to merge with another church to make this as seamless as possible. They had two stipulations. They said that the money was only going to go to a church that had elders already. And the second one was they had a list of about 10 or 12 men that they had supported over the years, they had become acquainted with, and they wanted us to send them an X amount of money to each one of those folks. And if we saw somebody on that list that we knew something about that didn't think they should get the money, then they had the okay not to send them the money. We didn't find that. But so sometime right after then, January 2008, we merged with the Afton Church. We did a couple of things. We paid off the existing mortgage that existed on this building, okay? We honored their request. It was Ed will remember, it was a process to meet with an attorney and work out all the details of merging two churches together and everything that went into that. It was quite tedious, and we spent a couple of long nights at the attorney's office hammering all this and putting it in place. So we paid off the existing mortgage, we honored their request, and the elders made a decision. And Ryan sort of alluded to that this morning in his class, but the elders made the decision to put the rest of that money into what we end up calling the building fund. And there were some people who weren't too crazy about that idea. But we figured that at some point in time, that money is going to be needed. We had no parking. We had to do something. And so we put that money into the building fund, and it never stopped us from supporting members that were in need. We either took it from the treasury or we had private collections at times to raise funds for people. But the other money in that building fund stayed in that building fund. So all this time we've been here. So we started the building in 2002. There on this other side of us here was a property house, and probably a little over half an acre. A little old couple lived in there. Sometimes not a nice couple. we got in trouble for kids playing on their lawn and things like that. But we were always good neighbors. I can't tell you the number of times people, Joe and David Lindbergh and other people would, make contact, do things because the gentleman died, and it was only the wife that was there for the last few years. And so we helped them out, and we tried to buy that property 3 different times. Each time we tried to buy that property, it was well over the market value for that property. We did a search, real estate search. It was worth this much. We paid this much. And each time they said no, we said, okay, but that property is worth more to us than it will be anybody else. So, going forward, don't think that you can get more money, because we will try and buy that property from you. There was one time that property, they thought the property was going to be zoned commercial. This side of Henry Avenue was going to be commercial, not residential. And so they were holding fast till they thought they were going to, really make a killing. Ed said that's not going to happen, and it never happened. It didn't happen. So finally, the lady got too ill to stay by herself, and her daughter contacted us and said, "Okay, you can buy the property." So we purchased the property next door. That was in August of 2016. We purchased the property, and the upper picture is the house being demolished, and then the lower picture, us getting ready to finish the parking lot. The construction started in March of 2017 and finished in June of 2017. And what you see is the result of those efforts. Again, let me tell you, that doesn't happen as easily as it did without Ed. Because again, and especially now we're talking concrete. So that's the expertise, and that doesn't happen unless it's Ed. I came up here one time, see how things were going, and he didn't see me, I don't think, but I just parked because I saw him in this ditch operating this piece of equipment. Here he is. It's like noon. He's out there, and he's just, he knows what he's doing, obviously, and he's just working away. That's the story. This is how we got here. I think you can see God's hand in all of this. I'm pretty sure that in the things that follow, you'll see God's hand as well. Let me just say one last thing. You're probably, I won't say everyone, but I think there are times when you're a member of a group, you get depressed, you get disappointed, tough things happen, and that happened to me several times, but every time something like that happened, I always asked myself, no matter what was going on or caused me to feel like that, I always asked myself, what's the best thing for your wife and your children? And every time the answer was to stay put right here, because this is where they were thriving, this is where they were growing, and it was up to me then to, okay, let's move on and let's fix whatever's broken and go from there. Someone a week or so ago said, I love seeing young people sitting up front. It was Mark. I told Mark, I said, that's been happening for a long time. A long time. There have been kids sitting up here up front. We are so blessed, and we continue to be blessed. So that's the story of Ellisville. If you have any questions about anything later, come see me.